For a lot of people, the first time that they realized just how, wow, important that their personal data was in the 2018 Cambridge Analytica scandal, which is what we're going to be doing a deep dive into today on the Data Radio Show. Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Data Radio Show, where we're going to be doing a bit of a dive into the Cambridge Analytica scandal. There was a whole bunch of things going on all at once when it came to this particular issue, and a lot of the data that was found and used was used for things that maybe didn't end up being for the betterment of mankind in the long run. We've got a few years hindsight now, though, that we can look back on and see exactly what those impacts were. So we've fed a whole bunch of data and information from a range of sources into AI and said, hey, give us a hand on this one. And this is what it's come up with. But before we head over and have a listen to that, make sure that you give the channel a bit of a subscribe or a like for the video, or feel free to share the content. It'd be great to have you come along on the journey. All right, let's jump over now and see what we can learn about the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
Have you ever been online and just gotten that feeling that maybe things know a little too much about you?
Oh, yeah.
Like you're thinking about something and then poof, it's right there on your feed.
Right.
It's like we're swimming in data.
We are.
And it's like, whoa, who's using this stuff and what are they doing with it?
I think that's a really, really important question.
Yeah. So that's why today we are going deep.
We are.
You gave us a bunch of really interesting stuff to dig into. We've got a bipartisan policy center panel discussion.
Yes.
Reflecting back on the 5-year anniversary of the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
A great panel.
We've got a CNBC timeline of all the events surrounding it, and then just a good overview from Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as your curated stack of information to really understand this whole situation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a big one. This is a really pivotal moment in this whole story of data and what happens to it and who's using it and how do we even control it.
Yeah, so that's really what we want to understand today. What was the impact of this whole thing on how people are using our data?
Exactly.
And really, how did best practices kind of evolve out of this?
Yeah, what changed?
Yeah.
What changed?
What do you need to know?
Yeah, all right, so let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
It seems like this whole Cambridge Analytica thing kind of got set up way back in 2010 when Facebook launched this thing called Open Graph.
Yes.
What was that all about?
Well, I think a key thing to consider with Open Graph, which was launched in 2010, is that the ambition was to create a more interconnected social internet. So they would allow third-party apps to request access to not just a user's information, but also their friends' information.
Okay.
And that's a key vulnerability that was sort of inadvertently created that allowed for this massive collection of data.
And when we say information, we're talking about stuff like, your name and your gender and your location and your birthday and your political views even.
Political views.
Religious views.
Oh, yeah.
Relationship status. Oh, yeah. What you're doing online.
Your chat status.
Yeah.
Whether you're online or not.
And then even if you gave additional permissions like your private messages.
Wow.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it was a significant expansion of the types of data that were accessible across the platform.
Yeah. All right, so then fast forward a couple years, 2013, we've got this Cambridge academic Alexander Kogan.
Yeah.
And he creates this app called This Your Digital Life.
Yes.
So around 300,000 people were paid to take this psychological test through this app.
Yep.
Here's where things get kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Those 300,000 people, it wasn't just their data that got collected because of how Open Graph works. It was also all their friends' data.
Wow.
So we're talking estimates up to 87 million profiles.
Wow.
So this massive network effect of just harvesting data.
Huge, huge network.
Yeah, so this is all happening at a time when I feel like there was this real optimism about the internet, right? It's a democratizing force. And
yeah, not really the scrutiny that we see today.
I think it was really hard to see where this was all going to go.
Yeah, and Katie Harbath in that Bipartisan Policy Center panel made this really good point.
Yeah.
That, decisions made with good intentions years ago can lead to these unforeseen consequences down the road.
Totally.
She was even talking about how Obama's 2012 campaign used these similar tools for targeted sharing.
Yeah.
And, that was seem as innovative at the time.
Right.
So really interesting how these perspectives kind of change over time.
Yeah.
And then, the techlash starts to emerge,
Yeah.
particularly around Trump's election in 2016.
Right.
The Russian Internet Research Agency
Yeah.
ads, and then Cambridge Analytica just becomes this focal point.
Yeah, I mean, this is the moment that things really come to a head.
Yeah, so all this data is being collected.
Right.
How does this even come to light?
Yeah.
How does the public even become aware that this is going on?
It's really interesting, actually, because the unveiling of this story was a very gradual process.
Okay.
So The Guardian actually was publishing reports back in late 2015 about Ted Cruz's campaign.
Interesting.
And they had some more reporting in 2016 and 2017.
Okay.
And then in March 2018, simultaneously, the New York Times and The Guardian published these big articles that really brought this to public attention.
Got it. So it wasn't this overnight breaking news story. It was kind of like this.
Kind of bubbling under the surface for a while.
Yeah. Okay. So Matthew Rosenberg, one of the reporters at the New York Times who broke the story.
Yeah.
He talked a lot about how hard it actually was to report this thing.
It was hard.
He said there was a lot of misleading information coming from people at Cambridge Analytica themselves.
Right. And that's one of the really striking things is that you have an organization that's as opaque as Cambridge Analytica. And so how do you as a journalist go about verifying information?
Yeah.
And Rosenberg said they had this strict rule. They wouldn't publish anything unless they could corroborate it with documents or multiple independent sources.
Wow.
And he said a lot of the people they interviewed were actively trying to deceive them.
It's a really murky, kind of untrustworthy...
Murky is a good word for it.
Yeah, environment.
Absolutely.
So then we've got Alex Lundry, who worked on Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign.
Right.
And he said that they were pitched by Cambridge Analytica back in 2015.
Yeah.
And his perspective is really interesting because he comes from a background in data and analytics.
Yeah, he's a data guy.
Yeah. So what did he think?
Well, he said that right off the bat, he and his team were very skeptical.
Really?
Yeah, so they would constantly ask to see the underlying data and to do these validation tests.
Okay.
And they just kept hitting these roadblocks.
Yeah.
And so it became clear to them that the company's claims of predictive power were essentially what he called snake oil.
Wow. Okay, so you've got Cambridge Analytica saying they can micro-target people, influence them, and then you've got people like Lundry who know this stuff.
Who are experts. They're like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge gap between the marketing and the reality.
Yeah, it seems like there was.
Of what they were actually able to do.
Yeah. Okay, so we've also got Alexander Kogan himself.
Yeah.
The guy who made the app that collected all this data.
Right.
He reportedly said that if these techniques actually worked as well as they claimed, he'd probably be working for some huge global corporation.
Exactly.
Not running a customer service startup.
Right, he wouldn't be doing that.
Right, and then you've got those whistleblowers who came forward after Cambridge Analytica collapsed.
Like Brittany Kaiser.
Yeah, and they had all this internal evidence.
In quotes.
Yeah, in quotes, that turned out to be more sales presentations than actual proof.
Yeah, a lot of it was very flimsy.
Okay, so then there's the whole science behind this idea of personality-based targeting using Facebook likes.
Yeah, this is interesting.
So the panel talked about this.
Yeah.
Even the Ocean 5-factor test, which is a widely used personality test.
Yes.
It only has a retest reliability of 0.5.
Yeah.
Which is not great.
Not that high.
Right. And then when you try to predict someone's personality from their Facebook likes, that correlation drops even further to 0.25.
Yeah. And so you start to ask, how good are these predictions, really?
Yeah.
I mean, you're basing it on likes.
Right. So this idea of this super sophisticated manipulation machine.
Yeah.
The reality is that the impact may have been less than what people thought.
It's not quite the puppet master that it's been made out to be.
Right.
But I think it's important to distinguish between manipulation and the issues that this raised around privacy.
Yeah.
Because this really became the catalyst for a lot of discussions and actions around privacy.
Okay, so it wasn't so much the manipulation aspect.
It was part of it.
Okay.
But I think what really kind of captured the public imagination was the scale of the data access and the fact that it was being done without people's knowledge or consent.
Yeah, and Facebook did end up making some changes.
They did.
Right, in 2014, they said, okay, developers can't access friends' data anymore.
Right.
But the timeline points out that those changes weren't retroactive.
Uh-huh.
So Cambridge Analytica's data collection Still kind of fell under the old rules?
Yeah, those old practices can have these really long-lasting consequences.
Yeah, so what was the fallout like?
Big.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg apologized.
Okay.
Went on CNN, he took out those full-page newspaper ads.
Right.
He testified before Congress.
Huge deal.
I mean, this was a major event.
Yeah.
And Facebook's market cap took a pretty big hit, too.
Yeah.
I think that shows that data privacy concerns can have real-world impact even on the biggest tech companies.
Yeah, and it wasn't just in the U.S., right?
No, this became a global issue.
Yeah. Wikipedia mentions that India and Brazil were demanding information.
Right.
There were lawsuits here in the U.S.
Yeah.
The UK Information Commissioner's Office.
They find Facebook.
Yeah, it was like a global ripple effect.
Yeah, it really shows how much scrutiny data handling practices were starting to get worldwide.
Yeah.
And the FTC also went after Cambridge Analytica's CEO, Alexander Nix and Alexander Kogan.
Okay.
And there were restrictions on their future activities.
Uh-huh.
And they were required to delete the data.
Yeah.
And Cambridge Analytica itself eventually went bankrupt.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, this was a pretty significant escalation in enforcement.
Yeah, and the financial penalties?
Oh, yeah.
$5 billion fine against Facebook from the FTC.
The biggest ever.
Yeah, and then the SEC.
Yep.
$100 million settlement for misleading investors.
About the risks of data misuse.
Yeah.
So those were pretty significant consequences.
It seems like regulators were taking this really seriously.
I think it signaled a very clear shift in the landscape.
Yeah.
And in April 2018,
Mm-hmm.
Facebook actually implemented the EU's General Data Protection Regulation,
The GDPR.
the GDPR globally.
Yeah.
So the GDPR essentially gives individuals more rights and control over their data.
Okay.
And so this was Facebook saying, okay, we're going to adopt these stricter standards internationally.
So interesting.
It was a really big move.
Yeah, Katie Harbath brought up this point that Facebook did an internal audit.
Yeah.
And they found hundreds, if not thousands, of other apps that had been given similar access to user data.
Yeah.
Which I guess really underscores the point that this wasn't just like a one-off thing.
No, it was systemic.
Yeah, it was like baked into how the whole system worked.
Yeah, and I think it also highlights the difficulty of controlling data once it leaves those platform servers.
Yeah.
Like, how do you track it?
Right.
How do you delete it?
Yeah.
And that's a challenge that continues to this day.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to remember that Facebook did take steps to address this.
Okay.
They shut down Open Graph for new apps in 2014.
Right.
And then for all the remaining apps by May 2015.
Yeah. So it seems like there was a real change.
Yeah, there was a pretty fundamental change.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like this scandal really like kicked off a lot of changes.
It was a catalyst.
Yeah. But how did it change the way companies manage data?
Right.
And think about transparency, like in a practical way.
Well, Alex Landry mentioned that companies like his really started to put a lot more emphasis on data privacy.
Okay.
And we saw legislation like the CCPA in California,
Right.
which gives consumers more control over their information.
Uh-huh.
And there's been this trend towards offering those sorts of rights nationwide.
Interesting.
So I think that really shows a shift in focus
Yeah.
towards individual data control.
So it seems like we're moving towards kind of like a baseline standard.
Yeah. And Facebook and Google and other platforms started rolling out these political and issue ad transparency tools.
Right. So this was to try to give users more visibility into like who's paying for these ads.
Who's behind them? Who are they targeting?
Yeah.
At least in theory.
Okay, so these were direct responses to what happened with Cambridge Analytica. Okay.
This was about bringing more accountability to online political campaigns.
So how well do these transparency tools actually work?
I think it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
I mean, Alex Landry brought up a good point that there's just so many ad variations now.
Uh-huh.
And they're changing so rapidly that it's hard for anyone to really keep up.
So even though there's more transparency,
Right.
it's still kind of hard to know what's really going on.
Yeah, and there's still this whole debate about, where's the line between persuasion and manipulation
Yeah.
when it comes to micro-targeting.
Right.
And the Cambridge Analytica scandal really put a spotlight on that.
It's interesting looking back now, Cambridge Analytica has kind of become this like shorthand
Yeah.
for a lot of these anxieties that we have.
I think it has become this sort of symbol of data privacy, manipulation, the influence of technology on democracy.
Yeah, and we saw it come up in the TikTok hearings.
Yeah.
Which shows that it's still relevant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you've got AI coming into the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole other level.
Yeah, generative AI. Like, imagine being able to create personalized political ads at like a massive scale.
I mean, the potential there is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that really throws in a wrench into the whole data management and transparency.
I think it exponentially increases the challenge.
Yeah, and then we've got all this data that we're generating.
Right.
But it still seems like it's hard to connect the online and offline worlds for like truly targeted advertising.
Yeah, there are still these real challenges in linking things like anonymous Twitter handles to real-world identities at scale.
So it seems like companies are trying, but it's not quite there yet.
It's an evolving landscape.
Yeah. So Katie Harbath, she mentioned being nervous about all the global elections coming up in 2024.
Yeah, with good reason.
Yeah, and how quickly campaign tools are evolving.
I mean, things are changing so fast.
Yeah. With AI, TikTok, all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really complex information environment.
Yeah, and Matthew Rosenberg made a good point about how trust in traditional media is declining.
Yeah.
And that can create an environment where misinformation can really spread.
It's a real problem because if people don't trust established news sources, where do they go for reliable information?
Yeah, so then what happens?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even with all these transparency efforts, Katie Harbath said that a lot of users still don't manage their privacy settings or understand how their data is being shared.
I think a lot of us are still just clicking through those privacy prompts without really understanding the implications.
Yeah, so I guess like looking back, it seems like the Cambridge Analytica scandal. While it may not have been exactly what everyone thought it was still a really big deal.
Like a wake-up call.
Yeah, it showed us these unintended consequences of technology.
Absolutely.
It shifted the focus to data privacy.
Yeah.
And it led to all these efforts to improve data management and transparency.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary.
Yeah.
This was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
And it had a lasting impact.
So it seems like there's still a lot to figure out.
Oh, yeah, we're just at the beginning.
Yeah, so here's something for everyone to think about.
Okay.
As you're navigating your own digital life. What does true control over your data really look like?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean in the future? And how do you balance convenience with privacy?
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge.
It is.
It is.
Yeah, so think about that.
Hey, thanks for checking out this week's episode. Don't forget to hit that like button if you haven't already, to share the video or subscribe to the channel so you can get updates when they come out. This is one I found really fascinating because personally when I was studying, this was the kind of dangerous scenario that we were always taught about when it came to people trusting particularly the internet, as it was kind of known when I started studying many decades ago, without knowing exactly how their data was going to be used. So it's a really important reminder for people always to remember what happened there and to be aware of what's going on in your surroundings. All right, make sure that you have, as I said, done the sharey, subscribey, likey thing. Live long, prosper, be one with the force, and I will catch you guys all next time.